Hey there, folks, and welcome back into the Northern Football Podcast. Ben Steiner alongside Alex Gangué-Ruzic and Brendan Dunlop. Another episode of NFP here on the Nation Network, and certainly a bit of a quieter week in Canadian soccer, it seems. There wasn't a whole ton going on this week. MLS Cup and another title for Greg Vanney after 2017 with TFC, and Marky Delgado as well. But I guess just how have you guys been this week? I know that I spent some time watching some terrible movies, and Alex watched a much better movie.
Yeah, of course. I went down Bellingham, USA, no relation to Jude, to go watch the 10th anniversary of Interstellar, because I know that's across Canada, unfortunately, and in Langley was sold out. So it was, funnily enough, like from where I live, it was probably a similar drive to go down to Bellingham then go to Langley, and the theater was nice, front row seats. Got a little American afternoon.
Wow, man's over here thinking that you went to Wicked and that's what you were going to bless us with. No, you drove to watch a 10-year-old movie. Also,
an all-time.
Kind of feel like it's older. Interstellar. I almost feel like it's older.
It feels like it.
I still remember where I saw it debut. I saw it at the Cambie Street Theater, old retro theater in Vancouver. But I might need to see it in like IMAX now, just for that like full Interstellar experience.
So much better in IMAX. Incredible.
Yeah, much better than the movie that I watched. I spent 90 minutes watching a Jewish Hallmark movie on Saturday night, Menorah in the Middle, where the secondary love interest was named Benjamin or Benny. So yeah, it was terrible. It was definitely 90 minutes spent. I don't know if it was spent well, but it was certainly interesting and kind of funny at some points, especially for a Jewish guy named Ben.
So when's your life becoming a Hallmark movie?
Yeah, but Menorah in the Middle starring Ben Steiner is just him at five-a-side trying to like figure out formations and play a 10 role in a five-a-side game.
It's a rondo.
Yeah, next time I show up to Queen's Park Strangers and I do something nice in midfield, you can call me the Menorah in the Middle instead of like midfield maestro or anything like that. But a bit of a quiet week in the Canadian soccer space as well. Some unfortunate news for Alphonso Davies, who in a 4-2 win for Bayern has to go out injured and likely won't play again in 2024 as he looks on to 2025. But Alex, when you look at Alphonso Davies' situation, Jonathan David also with a big weekend, it's a bit of two different sides for these two players that have been outstanding, and I'm actually shocked that neither of them were in the Star Award conversation, especially Jonathan David.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't want to completely empty our Canadians abroad notebook. Stay tuned for that section as usual at the end. But yeah, it was a bit of a strange weekend. It was a lot of good and a lot of bad, right? Like it was one where you see like Jonathan David, big performance, and then Tajon Buchanan had a bit of a quieter game, error leading to a goal for Inter. You're like, okay, that's maybe not so good. And then you have some positive moments throughout the weekend, like a Moise Bombito, Derek Cornelius is back. But then, you see Justin Smith make his second appearance. Doesn't go maybe as to plan compared to the first one, but hey, that's sometimes football, right? It's a lot of highs, a lot of lows. It's about managing that. And I guess if you're Jesse Marsh and if you're on the women's national team side, whoever that new head coach is going to be, it's watching that and making the best decisions for the future. Because yeah, I mean, just looking at some of the questions we have here on the men's national team, it's funny to think this year is over, but 2025 gets me excited now. Just the more I'm starting to think about it.
You guys know how much I like you guys, obviously, to be recording this show during Aston Villa in the Champions League. And didn't mean to cut you off there as you finish things up, but John Duran just scored a screamer, and that guy's exceptional. Absolutely elite. Sadly, not a dual national eligible for Canada, but if he was, I would say move over, guys in the front line. Sorry, Kyle Laren. John Duran is coming in.
Well, you can at least make me excited. MLS alumni, John Duran, finding success.
There you go. Yeah. There you go. Former Chicago Fire great.
Before he was at Villa Park, he was killing it there. This was before Soldier Field, wasn't it? They're out at Bridgeview.
Yikes.
SeatGeek Stadium. Oh boy. And also the place where Bernadeschi didn't take that shot, and there's definitely some TFC news to talk about as well. But we'll jump into the CanMNT off the bat here. And from Niles Gould on Blue Skies, the lack of an opponent for the rumored Campoutine, if it does actually happen, due to the opponent availability or due to cost. I remember before COVID, we played 2 matches against Iceland in January in an attempt to get more FIFA points under the old CONCACAF qualifying format. And the U.S. actually announced 2 friendly games for January earlier today. And it seems like those would be potentially opponents that Canada could have faced in a Campoutine if that were to come together.
Yeah, well,
it's a tricky window, right?
Yeah, well, just
Go ahead, Alex.
not to cut you off, but from last week, I remember we kind of mentioned that Vancouver was thrown out as an idea, right, for potential Camp Poutine. And it is worth noting with that is like I think it's U.S., Costa Rica. Now I forget the third opponent. It's like a South American opponent. It's all in Florida. So I do wonder if for Canada this is also like them maybe not wanting to go to Florida for the 18th million time at Bradenton there at the, whatever they call the ING Academy, because we haven't seen that for a while. Because I don't think it's cost. I wouldn't say it's cost. And I think also what we're going to see over the next 2 years from what you see, I mean, you saw Victor Montagliani out doing the rounds yesterday in terms of media availabilities, and he's kind of hinting at it. Like Canada's going to want to start to do a lot of stuff in Canada over the next 2 years because ultimately they're planning for a World Cup, and something as small as a Camp Poutine might not seem like big in the grand scheme of things for preparation, but it's little things like, getting used to the idea that Canada's going to have a base camp in 2026 in Vancouver. If they do end up having a Camp Poutine there, this is a chance to start looking at things they want to improve, testing, all that sort of stuff.
Jesse Marsh said when they were here in November that they weren't sure if January was going to happen and that it would just be domestic guys or a young player camp. It does seem unfortunate that they'd miss an opportunity to schedule a game if that was available. But I think I'm one of those in the camp that it's not the biggest priority for the federation at the moment, and it would be impossible for them to get kind of a full squad and full measurement anyway. So it feels like Kevin Blue and Jesse Marsh will find a way to best use the window with their limited opportunities, I guess.
Yeah, I would hope that they have something, and I think in terms of that potential camp in Vancouver, it'd be great. But it's not also a window where you necessarily need an international opponent. I think they've probably sorted out in terms of costs of how to put something like this on. But in terms of an international opponent, that's not something that I don't necessarily even know the benefit when you're looking at a team that wouldn't have most of the starters on the roster, considering those are all mainly European guys. So you're looking at, MLS, CPL, maybe even some younger players than that level. And in terms of MLS Next Pro, maybe some USL guys. So when you're looking at that kind of roster, playing a CPL team in preseason or playing like a VMSL selects could be a decent enough challenge just to kind of get some game speed under you.
I was going to say that too, to Alex's point about connecting with the community and just getting people in the country excited. Yeah, a CPL team in preseason would be great. I don't know. I mean, the logistics of being able to play Cavalry in Calgary in January would be impossible. But where these windows would allow it, that you can kind of do a few of those things with some type of a makeshift squad, that would be great. That would be really cool. The opportunity to play the Whitecaps, I guess, wouldn't fall because they're off to Marbella probably in earlier mid January, so they wouldn't have that window. But if you could do something, at BC Place with Vancouver FC, like that would be cool. I would really like to see them explore that in the near future.
We'll put some dots together. I saw Tommy Wilden Jr. was kind of hinting. I don't think if it's been officially confirmed, but I saw like True North Foot had this, that Tommy Wilden Jr. mentioned through Cavalry that it looks unlikely they'll play their Champions Cup game at ATCO again for reasons. CONCACAF hasn't approved it. He hinted Vancouver again, like either Starlight or Swangard or BC Place were options they were looking at. You put 2 and 2 together. They're going to have to play that game in February. Training camp's going to start early. Maybe a Cavalry trip to Vancouver might coincide with, national team activities in Vancouver, and you start to put the pieces together. That could be some positive developments in a way to strengthen the relationship with the CPL too, right? Especially if you're getting guys called up for this potential January camp.
And that does seem like a connection that Jesse Marsh wants to make further. We saw the invite for Estacio, and now Estacio's in that job at York United, that there is that desire to create those ties with the CPL. So I would wonder whether that's, potentially an option. And you wouldn't be so far off of preseason for Vancouver FC either, that you could potentially be looking at Willoughby as a venue for this. And I think that would be probably smarter in terms of convenience than Starlight for a Champions Cup draw. Or a game with the Canadian men's national team Camp Poutine roster, and BC Place for Cavalry versus some Honduran team doesn't seem like that is maybe the smartest idea in terms of.
Well, they're in pot 2. They're probably not going to get a Honduran team, but yes, point applies. I'd say Swangard though. Give me Swangard. Like, how cool would Cavalry Tigres be at Swangard? Just putting that idea out in the air right now. I mean, the draw's tonight. Don't forget, so we'll find out. But as of reading who Cavalry might be playing, keep an eye on that.
And from Matt Paternostra, any news on the national team sports complex? And also, has Justin Smith put himself in the conversation for the next national team camp? It doesn't seem like there's been a lot of movement in terms of the national team sports complex. There is the facility in Vancouver that was built in part by Canada Soccer, the Whitecaps, and UBC Athletics, that they all contributed to building that facility that is called the National Soccer Development Center, even though it isn't really that in practice, considering where the men's and women's national teams tend to go, which is, of course, Toronto and playing out of the BMO training center that is built for TFC. So when you look at that situation, like, it seems like the Woodbine thing just has kind of been stuck in the mud over the last little while.
Yeah, it's frustrating because it seemed like there was a real opportunity there to create that and benefit the national team and the CPL, which I think was always been, the grand intention of creating the CPL to begin with. And that's a real brick and mortar version of doing it, and something that we've always needed. Like, big nations have national training centers. Right? We should have that. We should have the doors open to those places for players who are out of contract, out of season, out injured, to be able to walk in and use it like a community center, like we would in a community center, and like how they do in other countries. So I still think that's important. Where things are right now, it just feels like it's not high on the priority list. I think that'll be something that's one of those 26 legacies. And in reality, in this country, like, one's not enough. Like, there should be two. There should be two, so that you can have separate opportunities, and you're not leasing it and just waiting on schedules to make sure that TFC are on the road in the middle of your international window to be able to use that professional facility. It'd be great if we can get to a point where you've got a real West Coast one and one out in Toronto or Montreal would be amazing.
I think a model that you could potentially follow in terms of building out sort of a Canada Soccer training center plan would be the Canadian Sport Institute plan, where they have these high performance training facilities across the country in major cities where any nationally carded athlete can go and train with top tier training facilities, top tier strength coaches, and strength facilities and physios and all of that's available to Canada's Olympians, that some of the women's players have used in the past, in terms of CSI Pacific, that is still out in Burnaby, and different CSIs across the country. I think if you could work something out even with CSIs, where you can have soccer facilities, maybe at two of them, like you rebuild the soccer facility at CSI in Vancouver, and you build one in Scarborough as well. That's where you can kind of benefit instead of building all of the infrastructure of a sporting like institute. Like, if you can use the gym that's already up to that high standard, why not? That seems like a pretty smart money saving activity that you can go about, and then you can build the soccer infrastructure on top of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll keep an eye on this, because I think the question, when I saw it from Matt, I'd read something on social media last week about there being movement on the complex, and I found it finally. James Sharman on Sportsnet last week wrote that it looks like they've confirmed that they want to put shovels in the ground in 2026 for a complex in Toronto. And I think, that would only be positive, because you see it, like, especially in Europe. I think immediately of like France and Clairefontaine, right? And just outside of Paris, just having that complex where it becomes a hub for the national teams, but also the youth levels for many things. I think they have something similar in England. I want to say like St. James, something like that, the training ground.
St. George's, yeah.
St. George's, that's the St. James is, of course, Newcastle's famous ground. But I think of those two complexes as something where, if you're Canada, of course, it's tougher because you have such big geography. But the fact that you already have one out west and you could have one out east could be a way to maybe, by having both geographical centers kind of represented in that way. That could be two very useful things, especially that the World Cup for Canada, they're going to have two hubs, because they start in Toronto, then they head out west, and then we'll see what happens from there. I think that was interesting to see that report out there, because I think that's a big thing that I'm watching out for from this World Cup is infrastructure, because infrastructure in this country is sorely lacking. I mean, top level, you see it with just everything, but you see it really at the grassroots level. Just, here in Vancouver, it's struggle to get all the kids the fields they need, the adult leagues, etc. And it's good that we're seeing there's a couple of venues coming as part of the World Cup, but there needs to be more. And I think a training complex would be one of the big areas they could fill that gap. And maybe that could be home to a pro team as well down the road, which would also further help infrastructure in another way.
So one of the things that's troubling is that the World Cup is in 500 days less. And you're talking about things that take years worth just to get permits, right? And I agree that all of those things are needed. And I wish that this was a conversation and an episode we were recording in 2021, where you're talking about these facilities being built that national team players, prospective national team players, youth national teams are able to use. And now we're just hoping that you get facilities that are suitable enough for these World Cup teams and that we can, find a way to use for the professional teams that exist. I got a feeling that, the NSL could be involved in, or at least in benefiting from this. If you're talking about putting these in areas where, those franchises or those teams are kind of in split facilities. I'm thinking of Toronto, who I know are at York Lions Stadium, but they're competing with York University and York United for that space and that time. It'd be great if they had access to a spot in Scarborough on a consistent basis. And to Ben's point about building onto existing infrastructure, that's just what we do in this country. It is definitely the most practical thing to do, especially when you're looking at a rush timeline. I don't even think that they could do that in 500 days, but I'd be happy to be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a while to even build new pitches. Like they've shut down a few community parks in Vancouver, and including Memorial, where Alex and I have played fairly regularly in the past. That's going to be shut down for the next 500 plus days to build.
Oh, really? Yeah.
To build this facility for the World Cup teams, and so they're closing down, a pitch that's already been there, an area that has been good for grassroots soccer. There's about 4 pitches around that area. And they're closing that down, and that's going to make things tighter in terms of sort of the grassroots soccer in Vancouver over the next little while. But then hopefully
but that's a plan that they decided on in 2021.
Yeah. And that's my hope is, we're going to see the benefit of that in a similar way we saw the benefit of the kind of restructuring of the soccer facilities at UBC for the 2015 Women's World Cup.
Mm-hmm.
And Alex, second part of that question, though, I know we spent a lot of time on the first part, but Justin Smith, could he be in the national team picture?
Yeah, I think he's slowly putting his way in there. I think it's something where we'll have to see what March looks like, because I think what the challenge for Canada in March is, like, of course, with him, it's cap tie, right? Because he is a dual national, although I don't know how much France will be interested. So I think that's a nice positive that you're not up against, like, this isn't like a situation where there's a bit of a worry that he could get poached very soon. But it is something where you'd like to get him cap tied, and I think it'll depend on his performance. I think for his performance, he hasn't vaulted himself quite yet into that March window yet. I've liked what I've seen from him. You see the potential. It's been good that he's getting the Liga minutes, but you also see where he has to grow, where he has to learn. But I right off the bat, I'm thinking June, and I think Gold Cup was another one I threw out last episode in terms of target dates I'm looking at. And look, with the player of his performance and the fact this is only his second game in La Liga this week. He played in Copa del Rey last week. Like, things could change very quickly in 2 to 3 months. So I think it's still early to be he's in that March squad yet. But if he is playing at a good enough level, I don't think Jesse Marsh will hesitate, because having a kid like that in an environment where they're going to be chasing a trophy, you're able to cap time, like that's such a good opportunity for someone if he deserves it at the time.
Gold Cup is a great opportunity. And to your point, if you just see the name Justin Smith and you're like, oh, he could be cap tied for someone else. France is not at the top of the list of nations that you would suspect to be losing out to this guy, but Gold Cup seems like a great target time and possibility.
And on that same route as well, after losing out on Kulinovic, could there potentially be a call up for Promise David? That's the question from Moody's Ratings, or is he just too clunky of a fit for Marsh's system?
That one, it is a good question about the Marsh's system, because I think in terms of Promise David, he has, I think, with his performance, elevated himself into that start to like must call territory, like it was almost with Kulinovic. Like David's almost he's already at like 8 goals this year for Union Saint-Gilloise. For a player that was playing in Estonia this year, it's been a remarkable story. And shout out to just USG and the way they scout and the way they find players like Promise David playing in these obscure leagues and getting contributions out of him. In terms of the fit, it is interesting because he's such a unique player. Like, he's massive. He's like 6'3", 6'4", might even be 6'5", so tall, so lanky, but he is quick. He moves fast. He can get in behind. He's scored breakaways. It's not like he's just kind of marauding out around there like a Paulo Nuachu or something. Like he's got speed for his size. But in terms of the pressing, I mean, Saint-Gilloise, they don't press a whole bunch. So I would be curious to see how it fits. But I think, look, in terms of number nines, we've said in the past, Canada's number 9 depth is a bit weird. Like there's very many different profiles, and I think Promise David would be unique enough that Marsh could have some fun and have a look. So yeah, if he keeps scoring like this, I think he's one for Marsh. For March in under Marsh, lots of March there that I'd like to see called.
Yeah, shout out to Benedict Rhodes, who I saw tweeted the other night that he was spelling the word marshmallows and spelled out MARSCH, and so spends a little bit too much time around Canadian soccer. But Jesse Marsh,
man, the amount of text that my wife has received that's supposed to be, what do you want to do for lunch? And it's, what do you want to do with Lukaku up front, is ridiculous.
Always put him in a 2-man. That's the answer.
And from Marquise, do you have any information on Daniel Jebuson's absence from the Watford roster? Is it form or injury? And do you see Koné making his way back into the Marseille lineup, or is he a lone candidate, Brendan?
I mean, a loan feels a little premature. I mean, obviously we all read into those comments from Zerbi and feel like he's out of favor and maybe has slipped down the pecking order, but they invested in this guy. It's not abnormal for guys to make a transition to a new league and have periods where they're on the bench or they have to work their way back into a squad or in their place. I think a loan would be very, very premature, and that would be bad. Alex?
Yeah, I'd say for that loan is too premature. And I think just because of the injuries, because you can't discount how big of a factor that can play for a young guy, new league. And then you get injuries on top of it. You're trying to integrate into a system. I think for Koné, we just have to see how he responds. I think it's worth noting that at Watford, it is important that he had a few spells where he was thrust pretty much into the lineup regularly off the start. But you have to remember, he went through a lot of coaches. There were some moments where he went a couple weeks with only off the bench, going through a moment like this, and then he recovered nicely and hit some of his best patches. I think that's kind of what De Zerbi is pushing out of him, because I think you look at this lineup like in Marseille, like there is room for a Koné. There is room in that midfield for him to really be the centerpiece. Like I just look at a Harit, so inconsistent. You look at some of the other pieces, I see Koné fitting in. And I think this is just more of a tough love approach for De Zerbi, which, while infuriating sometimes to watch from an outside perspective, I think this is something where Koné, in terms of a professional, this can only help him as long as he takes it the right way and attacks this patch. But yeah, in terms of that, too early for a loan. In terms of Jebuson, his form just hasn't been good. He has been dealing with a bit of a small injury from what I've seen. So it's not as if he's been kept out of the squad completely because of form, but his form just quite simply hasn't been good enough. And I think he'll know that. It's been a tough last year. You have to remember with, the blood clots and everything that he had to deal with. So it's not easy to get dropped back into the pro environment, but also he's getting a taste of the championship. He's going to have to earn his minutes. And to this point, he hasn't been good enough. And hopefully he can figure it out, because there's a lot of potential there in the kid. And I think that's something that Canadian fans would love to see, because it's a name we've heard so much of, but we actually haven't seen a whole lot of.
And also from Moody's ratings, any January transfers you think we'll see, or anything that you would like to see, Brendan?
I want to see Alphonso Davies go to Manchester United. That's not going to happen. I want to see Jonathan David move mid-season. That's also not going to happen. But a man can dream. Both would be great for our show and Canadian Soccer Daily if that happened.
You actually want him to go to United?
I would want Alphonso Davies to go to Manchester United. Yes, absolutely.
Of all the
rumors, he sees Ruben Amorim ball. He wants him as a wing back there, just marauding up the left wing under a Portuguese manager.
Yeah, and I also think that there's an opportunity at United, unlike Real Madrid, where they would push the evolution of him as a left-sided player, not just as a left back. I feel like the opportunity to be offensive at Real Madrid and move higher up the pitch, be it as a Richie Larea as a wing back and then eventually to the forward, would not be possible at Real Madrid, no matter who the manager is, no matter what happens with Vinny or Rodrigo. I just don't see that ever happening if he were to go there. Whereas at Manchester United, man, everything feels on the table. And it feels like a clean slate in a lot of ways. And he's coming in as an elite guy. This is not like when they bought his buddy Xerxes, where they're just like looking for a really good value and someone that they think is a key piece. No, this is someone that you see as an absolute star piece and a sale piece. And to have a Canadian, the face of the Canadian program in the English Premier League, it's as big as it gets.
Yeah,
Like,
decent reasoning. I would rather not United. It's nothing I've got against United. I don't really have a team in the Premier League. If there was any team, I'd have it's Palace, and they're not exactly putting ahead to get Alphonso Davies. But I don't know. I just feel like the potential to crash and burn at United is just so high, especially with the way that club's gone in the last 10 years or so.
yeah,
I would
but
argue that the potential to have crashed and burned at Bayern Munich, was
Or Real
equally as
Madrid.
high, and no one expected him to soar at Bayern, really, let alone reach the elite status that he did. I mean, and let's remember, he had to be converted to a completely new position in order to get action at all, and he's excelled incredibly. So yeah, I agree that it's a dangerous game at Manchester United. Certainly in the last decade, many fantastic players have gone there, but and not perform well. But with the exception of an eventually departing Anthony, I can't think of too many guys who like either can't recover if they still had legs left. Like Falcao didn't have any legs left. Angel Di Maria, I would say, didn't do too bad after leaving there. It seemed like that might have been the end for him. But that wasn't the case. I think that there's a lot of potential for Alphonso Davies, that if things didn't work out there, that he'd be able to still salvage a great career.
Well, I'm going to go for the boring or fun answer, depending on your perspective. I honestly, I like a lot of the European situations. Yeah, there's a few we're keeping an eye on, like a Buchanan, right? Like, can he truly break into that Inter setup or not? Like Koné, like we mentioned. But otherwise, everyone's settled. Even Jonathan David, I think with Lille, what they realize is you're not going to get more than 15, 20 million for a guy who's could sign a free contract in 6 months. If he can get you to Champions League, or even who knows with how Liga is going, win you a title, that might, the 50 mil that comes with Champions League and other, that might be worth more to them. And what a way to send him off, right? He's already hit 100 goals, etc. I don't see any of these guys moving, so I want to see one of the MLS guys moving. We haven't heard much rumblings, but hey, the season's over. They're out of season. Maybe someone in January. We'll see, like, oh, maybe I could actually go get a bargain with an Ali Ahmed, a Schaffelberg, a Dane Sinclair. We throw all those names out. I would love to see one of those guys make a move, like a surprise move, a Nathan Saliba. Because it feels like it's been a few years since we saw, like, I want like a Tejan Buchanan style move to Bruges, where he moved in the winter. I think there's a few Canadian players that if a wise team could scout and get good money out of.
I've said this a few times since the arrival of Jesse Marsch, that I think you're going to see teams within his network, within his social network, look at Canadian players, and January would be a really good time for a few of those MLS guys that you mentioned. I think I've said this before, like a Saliba, a move to RB Salzburg or a team of that tier. I think that'd be really good right now. And ahead of what would be a brand new MLS season for him. That would be good. There'll be a few guys that'll be watched like that. For Ali Ahmed, I could see a move. When Richie Laryea went to Nottingham Forest, was a bit of a surprise. That seems like, not to Forest now, but a team like that in that same position, that seems like the right move for Ali Ahmed. So I don't know who that team is in the championship now, if it's Watford, if it's Burnley or what, but like that, I feel like that would be an excellent move. And it doesn't have to be England, but someone of that ilk would be a really, really good move for Ali Ahmed.
Yeah, I think as long as you're going to a place where you know you're going to play. Like, I get that there was a managerial change and shifts at Nottingham when Laryea went, and it wasn't exactly the best time, and then the whole pandemic happened as well. But I think if Ali Ahmed goes to Europe, he needs to get assurances that he's going to be playing at least some fairly significant minutes.
Well, it's not going to be Leeds, because I just realized they're top of the table in the championship, so definitely won't be Leeds.
Hey, they got a Red Bull logo on the front of their shirt. Maybe they'll see that as a loose connection to get Ali Ahmed, who has fit quite nicely into Jesse Marsch's Red Bull ball. Hey, he's been linked to top 5 leagues. I think Joshua Cloak there had him linked to a couple Serie A, a couple Bundesliga. Maybe we go bold and say Red Bull Leipzig. Yes, it's a big step, but they're kind of one of those clubs where, because they're such a data-driven club, they can make some risks. And hey, maybe Jurgen Klopp will be making some calls to the Vancouver Whitecaps.
Yeah,
At least they could have those conversations in German, right? Between Axel Schuster and
Exactly.
Jurgen Klopp. And maybe on that phone call, Schuster entices Klopp to come back into coaching with the Whitecaps. Maybe it all
Lots of
starts
coaching
falling on
trees
that.
going there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Klopp over Carlo though. Who would you really want? Come on.
Klopp.
Bring Carlo home.
Yeah, bring Carlo home. Exactly.
Yeah.
Home to Shaughnessy or where
North
would he
Van.
live? Yeah,
He's
North Van Carlo.
yeah, he's either a West fan or a North fan guy. I don't know. He's been to one. I think he's been to one game, and that photo just keeps circulating whenever there's a coaching vacancy in Canadian soccer.
Just Carlo in the white cap scarf.
Yeah.
Make it happen, Axel Schuster.
But there was some movement in terms of MLS this week. Of course, the LA Galaxy getting back on top of MLS, and no MLS Cup for Julian de Guzman as sporting director at New York Red Bulls. But the MLS Expansion Draft. Some of you guys will be listening to this after the MLS Expansion Draft for San Diego FC, the 30th team joining MLS to pick 5 players from MLS tomorrow night. We're recording this on a Tuesday. And some surprising protected lists from the Canadian teams as well. The Whitecaps leaving Takaoka and Bjorn Inge Udvik up for grabs potentially by San Jose, and TFC leaving Juan Lorenzo
San
Insigne
Diego.
up for grabs. San Diego,
Yeah,
yes. Yeah.
I think San Diego have got some real options here. I think a lot of Toronto FC fans listening would absolutely love if Lorenzo Insigne got plucked, but I think we all can agree that that's not going to happen. Takaoka though, or Ryan Raposo is also left available there as well, which I could see as that'd be a good signing. Like that's a good player to build a team.
If you're gonna pick a midfielder, you're picking Julian Gressel.
Yeah.
Like I think he's good as gone from Miami. He was unprotected there. I would have loved Miami to not protect Messi just for the hilarity of it. But yeah, I think.
But Gressel's going to complain about being on the West Coast again and whine and whinge. Is that the type of guy you want to build around?
He's a baller.
Yeah, he's a baller.
He's a baller. No, he's a baller for sure.
If he wants to be on the East Coast, then you can, I don't know, get Columbus to pay you some Gam and Tam again. Maybe all of their super draft picks for Julian Gressel.
Yeah, I mean, hey, it's not. Go Philadelphia Union. I just liked that trade. That was a win for the just, some of this stuff is so ridiculous. Like, and the expansion draft for me, the protected list, some of them are farcical because it's like the Union again. They left like 3 guys unprotected who they've already cut from their team, but they're unprotected. And it's like even Ryan Raposo, like you could sign him as a free agent in a month. Why would you pick him up in the draft? Why is he someone you can pick from a draft? Why is there an expansion draft? It's just such a funny little MLS process, and it's like. It's funny to see the league like have these fights internally with themselves where you see them move like we want to be able to sell players within the league for money, and you're like, oh, about time. And then it's like there's still expansion drafts and there's still little things like your transfer fee counting on your salary cap and all this little stuff. It's like, oh, come on, guys, just make it a little easier for yourselves, I beg.
Yeah,
Fafa Picault and Ryan Raposo out of contract, but if San Diego takes them, then Vancouver get what is the cut? Is it 50 in GAM?
Yeah, it's 50K.
And you get protected for the next expansion draft when team number 300 comes into the league.
Yeah, whenever Messi's
Las Vegas FC.
If they bring in the Las Vegas Lights with the kits that they have, I would be all for that. I'll never forget Alphonso Davies playing on a baseball stadium in suburban Las Vegas when he was like 14 years old. And it was him and unnamed trialist at the Whitecaps camp that year that just completely stole everybody's hearts. Nobody figured out who the unnamed trialist was until weeks and weeks later, and he was like some washed up guy that was actually like 30. But he was an unnamed trialist for a little while. I miss the days when there was, I think it was 10 years ago, the New York City and Orlando City expansion draft, where I think there were 10 rounds, 20 players picked. It was broadcast from some basement. And it was outstanding. And you just built your team through this expansion draft. I think Mehdi Belushi from the Whitecaps was picked by New York City FC in that one, and he's one of the guys that I've seen floated around for potentially the coaching vacancy there as well. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a sicko. I do work for MLS, but I love every bit of this expansion draft, trading the GAM for all the super draft picks. Like, I don't know. I love it. It's what makes the league kind of special.
Well, what I'd say is I feel like MLS has outgrown it. Like it was cool, you know, it's
Yeah.
like one of those things where it's like you're a teenager, you're doing some things maybe you shouldn't be. You're having expansion drafts and re-entry drafts and trading GAM and TAM. And it feels like, okay, maybe you're grown up now. You gotta put some of that stuff in the bottom of your closet and not look at it for a while. And it feels like MLS, it's like they're doing little big boy, big kid stuff where it's like, okay, they're trying to grow up, and then it's little things like the expansion draft. It's like, maybe that one we'll leave that one back in 2012 where it peaked, and then not drag it out any further than it needs to be.
See, I feel like that for the super draft, but I don't necessarily feel like that for the expansion draft, because I think it also too, I think it's important that you have guys with MLS experience on these new teams. I think it's also valuable for fans in these new markets that you would hope would have been MLS fans before, to have some guys that are familiar. Like I do see a value in that, as opposed to just loading up with some affordable players and a bunch of South American unknowns to try and field the best team, which is what MLS kind of was in year one. It was like the best college players, who are some convertible athletes, and then who do you know from South America that wants to live in America?
Yeah, no, okay, completely agree. And when you look at sort of what San Diego's building, especially with the 5-round expansion draft as well, they can only pick 5 players. There's 300 plus players that are available in this draft. So they're not building their team through the expansion draft. It helps them fill out, spots 18 through 21 on the roster. A lot of these guys, except
Some
maybe
of them might
for,
not even report, so it's like, what's the point of even draft?
Yeah.
like,
So why is it? But to Alex's points, why is it only 5 rounds?
because they realized the importance of the draft in this era of MLS is that's not how you're building your team. It's not sort of the key way that these teams are building out. They're more than happy to go make actual signings. Like Chucky Lozano's been signed to San Diego for like 6 months now, and they were a year and a half away from kicking off, and so he's just on loan right now and currently playing. But when you look at sort of the expansion draft of 10 years ago, that was how you built your team, was picking up, I don't know, pick your random MLS name of 2014, your Tommy McNamara's of the world, that would get picked up and plopped onto a roster, and that's what you're rolling with in year one. Joe Cannons of the world.
So I don't want to drag this out too long because we do have some other stuff, but I don't know. It just the fact that it's all pre-done, kind of, and the fact that some teams are actually could lose some valuable players, because also from the other, like if you're the LA Galaxy, you could lose Gaston Brugman, who is your MLS Cup final MVP. He's unprotected, or like Diego Fagundes to what could be a rival, right? Same states.
It should be a rival.
Should be a rival.
San Jose's not a rival. They haven't been competitive in a decade.
Like, how do you explain that to an LA Galaxy team that built a good roster, that just won a cup, and your reward is getting gutted for no good reason? I think with the expansion draft, you should cut it. And if you want to give those new teams an advantage, give them an extra week to negotiate with free agents without it being tampering, because that's get guys that teams genuinely don't want. Because I do find it a bit annoying that teams will get punished and have to choose between a player you might want but has less value, and you have all these discussions of like if the Galaxy lose a Brugman, that would be ridiculous.
Yeah, it does seem like that would be a kind of legitimate pick for them to pick up as well. Like, he is a little bit older, but it could be intriguing how San Diego's able to build themselves through this roster, and then through this expansion draft, and then build their roster through the rest of the offseason heading into the new season as well. CPL also had a draft this week, the CPL-U Sports Draft. And I was not as plugged in to the CPL-U Sports Draft this year, but a few enticing picks that at least got me excited. But Alex, were there anyone that sort of stood out to you, having watched a little bit of U Sports and some League One as well?
Yeah, the big one that stood out to me was probably Jovan Man. I mean, it helped that he had a big nationals, right? That sort of stuff will always, vault you to a top of a list. He scored the winning goal, but it was also a bit of the fact that I'd actually seen him play. I saw him with the Whitecaps in year one of League One. He played last summer for Burnaby, who I got to check a few games. I just like the pick. He can play 8, he can play 10, he can play 9. It's just the sort of versatile player you want. The one trend I really found interesting from these last few drafts is that they've kind of moved away from getting the 23, 24, 25-year-olds who are more pro ready, and gone for these more U21 players who can come in, learn. You can do like with Eric Lajeunesse, he comes for half a season, goes back to UBC, comes for half a season, goes back to UBC, learns, grows, gives you U21 minutes. And then when they're graduated, they can be ready to step into pro. And I thought Joven Mann really fit that model. And that was a good pickup from a Halifax team who's going to, be looking for some more U21s after struggling maybe a bit with the minutes last year. So he was really the one that stood out and that I was most familiar with.
It seems like the smart play, though, to go for these younger guys that you can hit your initiative with. And as you say, kind of, groom them with the time they have available. It's obviously affordable. I think it's a good experience for these guys that are probably not going to get professional experience if they play 4 years of university. So in that sense, this draft makes sense. It's workable for this league.
I think there could be some growth in the draft. I think including the CCAA, the collegiate circuit in Canada, could be good because there are a lot of players that play League One that play in that circuit. But in terms of the selections from this year's draft, Mehdi Asusi and Henry Godbout, picked by Vancouver FC, I think both of those players could play actual important roles next season. Asusi has experience with TFC2. He was outstanding, kind of controlling a record-breaking U of T team this year. Henry Godbout, probably the best rookie that we've seen since Tommy Gardner at UBC. And Gardner, just with injuries, never really settled in the CPL. But Henry Godbout, I think, could really settle in and be kind of an Eric Lajeunesse type player where it does take 2 or 3 years of going back to UBC, back to Vancouver. But I think there is a real opportunity there. The question in Vancouver is just whether we'll see kind of that opportunity from Afshin Gotbi that has been a little bit touch and go in terms of giving U Sports players a chance. Nicholas Hallam to Pacific as well. He was the OUA Rookie of the Year for U of T, often linking up with Mehdi Asusi. And I think that Pacific is taking a bit of a flyer on him. He's a local guy to Vancouver Island as well. But that could potentially be one that works out. And then Ibrahim Chami, the second pick round by Valor. He dynamic left back. I don't know really if he has much of a ceiling, but his floor is very much like he could start in the CPL. And that I think is where he'll get to, and he'll be a useful player. I don't really see him. He's a little bit older. I don't really see him moving on to a higher stage, but he could be a very useful CPL player.
Last one I'd throw in is Owen Antoniuk from Cavalry, because I've also seen him play with Whitecaps too. He went on loan to Atletico Ottawa. I like that because he brings some CPL and some pro experience on top of, having gone to college. He had some great seasons in League One Ontario and Alberta. And I feel like he's a Tommy Wilden Jr. player. Like for me, right away when I saw him, it feels like he could be a good Jay Herdman replacement if he doesn't come back, kind of that mile on remote. So that'd be another honorable mention I'd throw into that list.
We also found out some NSL news this week. They announced sort of a plan to help players settle in their new markets as well, sponsored by Canadian Tire. And then also that the league is going to kick off on a Wednesday, April 16, 2025. It's also the fifth night of Passover for all my Jewish friends and listeners out there. But I don't love kicking off on a Wednesday. It's down to stadium availability, and I think that was always going to be the problem. But it should have been a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, for TV time, the idea of prime time versus Saturday afternoon in April, I could see the corporate argument for that. At the same time, just kicking off is a celebration, right? And something we've all been waiting for a lot longer than just the two and a half years that this has been in planning. So I'm excited to get to that date. It's going to be pretty special. I wouldn't be doing anything for Passover, but I will check out that game if I'm able to, if the cards fall right. So it'll be great to see them finally kick off. And on the Canadian Tire player resettlement initiative, I think that's great too, that you've got, a corporate partner that's helping to make this easier for a lot of players, because that's just the standard. That's basically what professional soccer is. But in a brand new league, it'd be very difficult to ask all the teams to be able to do that in addition to everything else that they're launching from scratch. So it's great that there's actual money and a real partner behind that.
What I would say, my wish list, and I mean, maybe it'll happen like the weekend after on April 19th. I feel like at least some portion of opening weekend, maybe it'll be something where like there's a standalone game, like you mentioned, maybe kind of almost made for TV, which is valid because you do want to capture TV interest. At the same time, though, I think you really want to stoke fan interest and having a good game, good time. I think for me, the ideal has to be a Vancouver Rise BC Place, April 19th. take a pick of an opponent, maybe Montreal, because they've built a fun roster, and you maybe start with a real marquee game between two of the what have been the leading franchises, it feels like, in terms of stuff that's gone on over the last 6 months. That would be a real dream to be able to go to BC Place and see that matchup play out. I think they could really get some good juice out of that one in terms of people coming and the interest in creating a buzz around a game.
I mean, contrary to that point, would you not want to start at whatever your venue is going to be, stage that as like the big first time, and then have like a showcase game that's a BC Place, kind of how the PWHL did it in their first year with the showcase game at Scotiabank Arena. They sold that out in January after late January after playing the first couple games at their smaller rink.
I think the showcase game it's a good idea. Maybe you find a weekend that I think May 2-4 or something like that, where you can kind of make an event around it. I don't like the idea of opening the door to that, because that's not what the league is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Simple as that, right? And you don't want to be misleading people, and you don't want to set ridiculous expectations, because there's going to be 300 people at York Lions Stadium for the rest of the AFC Toronto games. And I'd love to be wrong with that, but just based off of how things seem to be in the city, that's a reality that they're definitely facing. But I do agree that they should definitely do a showcase and make it a spectacle, and just find the right time to do it. July 1st would be another great weekend.
So it depends on perspective. Because what I would argue is, if you do it BC Place for the opener, then when you do like your first game at Swangard, say that all goes through, you can almost sell it like a second home opener. But then I guess you could argue that you just do your home opener at Swangard and sell the showcase game. I just do feel like for a new league, a lot of interest, especially Vancouver, that there is already that history that that's already there. I do think they'd probably be the one market that I could see starting in like a bigger stadium, where I think for the others, I think there's benefit for Halifax having their whole home opener at Wanderers ground. I mean, where else is it going to be? But yes, for an AFC Toronto to start at York Lions, for Ottawa to start that. But I think for the Rise, there is a legitimate argument to be had that BC Place might make most sense to really get the buzz going.
I mean, I feel like, just gut feeling, is the first game is probably going to be Toronto Vancouver at York Lions Stadium. That's just like what I assume it's going to be. Two big markets, it's going to be Toronto for sure. Like, I don't know that, solidly. I'm not reporting anything, but you wouldn't launch this league without launching it with Toronto. Maybe it's Montreal, but I do imagine that, Toronto will host that first game.
If you're trying to avoid a weather risk, would you not do it in Vancouver and make it a 5:30 start? Then you still have an 8:30. I mean, we're talking about a Wednesday.
Yeah, I do think it has to be in Toronto. I do think it has to be in your biggest market, where both your broadcasters are located and all your sponsors have their main offices. Like, I think that Toronto has to host that first game, and I think the PWHL realized that. And I think, looking at the PWHL as sort of what you should do, is what this new league could potentially use as kind of a blueprint.
Toronto Ben strikes again.
But the start of the NSL certainly going to be exciting nevertheless. Brendan just had to hop off to get back to Rock. But we do have our final section, Canadians Abroad. For a full roundup of the latest on Canadians Abroad, check out the Canucks Abroad Twitter. Jonathan David scored his 100th goal for Lille and then added 101 soon after in a 3-1 win versus Brest. He now leads Liga in goals with 11 and 20 goal contributions, 17 goals and 3 assists in all competitions. Alphonso Davies will be out until January with a hamstring injury. He played 90 versus Heidenheim, but then felt something after the match. And Derek Cornelius is back from his injury from Marseille and was already thrust back into action off the bench against Saint Etienne. A big vote of confidence for Cornelius as Koné struggles to get back into the team. So there's a lot to look at for these Canadian players, and we'll just see whether Koné is able to get back in. And we touched on it a little bit earlier as well.
Yeah, but I think we'll see with Koné. I think the challenge has been there. It's been issued. We know what's going on. I like that Cornelius was thrust right back in. It really feels like De Zerbi has gotten to trust him this season. First game was kind of out of necessity, injuries, suspensions. But since then, there's been a trust that when he's healthy, he's available, not suspended. He's been giving him a look. And so hopefully he can get some real good minutes for Marseille, because with Koné, he's younger. These sorts of ups and downs are part of a young footballer's journey. But for Cornelius, having made this big move in his prime, from Sweden to a club like Marseille, the more minutes he gets, the better it is for him, for his national team career, just building that partnership with him and Bombito long term. So I'm really excited for Cornelius. He fits this system so nicely. So keep an eye on him, and he'll probably be one. For whatever reason, Marseille games are at a really reasonable time too, so it's easier to keep a track of him versus some of these like really early Liga kickoffs that Jonathan David and Lille always seem to be subjected to. So it's just a little easier to keep an eye on Cornelius too, from a Canadian perspective.
And that's all we've got for this episode of Northern Football. From Brendan and Alex, I've been Ben, and you can make sure to tune into our podcast on YouTube as well. We're always available there. I know Jeff Salisbury watched us on YouTube and then asked whether we're on YouTube. We certainly are on YouTube, and we cut some shorter things on YouTube, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Twitter. We're kind of everywhere at this point, and make sure to follow our personal accounts as well. Also kind of everywhere. I know Alex at least posts on every platform under the sun, but you can find us wherever you find your podcast, wherever you find your videos, and we're probably there as well. So thanks so much for tuning in.